सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hi and welcome to this episode of ThePrint Security Code. Viewers like you know ThePrint's developed a reputation for granular journalism and in-depth analysis, often on topics you won't find discussed or reported anywhere else. But that quality of journalism needs money. I appeal to you to subscribe to ThePrint by clicking on the link in the description below. 15 minutes after midnight, Oyo began to insistently demand the attention of Colonel Stanislav Petrov, the officer at the lonely Serpukhov 15 monitoring station near the small, snow-blown town of Kurilovo. A Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile, Oyo told him, had been launched by the United States with a warhead that would yield an explosive equivalent to over 1 million tons of TNT. 4 more warheads, the Oyo tracking satellites reported, were following just behind it. To Colonel Petrov, the evidence of his eyes didn't seem right. I had a funny feeling in my gut, he later said in an interview. In training, Petrov had been taught the United States would seek to overwhelm Soviet defenses with a single massive barrage of nuclear weapons. 5 missiles would not achieve that end. Finally, he reported to his superiors, this was a false alert. That decision stopped imminent Soviet retaliation on the night of 27 September 1983. A date you and I ought to have remembered because it might just have marked the end of modern civilization. Later inquiries demonstrated that the Oyo satellite system had been misled by an unusual combination of sunlight bouncing off of high-altitude clouds and the satellite's own unusually elliptical Molniya orbits. This week, as Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden meet, the most consequential discussion they'll be having is about keeping machine intelligence out of decision-making on the use of nuclear weapons. 45 nations have already signed on to restrictions on the use of military AI, Will Knight reports, and China has brought its own proposals to the table too. The issue is complicated by United States sanctions, which deny China access to some cutting-edge AI technology. But an agreement to keep AI out of nuclear weapons control systems will be a solid step forward, even if months or years of discussion could be needed to agree on how a deal will be implemented and verified. China's nuclear arsenal has grown both in size and in sophistication and will likely triple by 2035. Tensions over the Taiwan Straits or the Indian Ocean might at any stage flare into conflict. But arms control negotiations are critical to ensuring both sides avoid marching into the apocalypse. Planners at the Pentagon, Ross Anderson recently reported, are already experimenting with technologies that give nuclear weapons some degree of artificial intelligence-driven judgment-making options. The common risks this poses to both the United States and China, as well as countries like Russia, provide compelling reasons for Xi and Biden to negotiate a deal now. In early 1981, North Atlantic Treaty Organization forces initiated a series of aggressive maneuvers along the Soviet Union's borders, intended to mount psychological pressure on the enemy. The authoritative historian of the crisis, Nate Jones, has noted that United States warships sailed into the far northern and eastern regions of the Soviet Union, areas they had never surveilled before. Air gaps in Soviet defenses were relentlessly exposed. On one occasion, a United States aircraft flew over the strategically vital Kuril Islands and remain there for 20 minutes before it was detected. This relentless pressure on their vulnerabilities alarmed the Soviet leadership to a degree never seen before during the Cold War. The United States National Security Agency's history later reported that, and I quote, Soviet concern for border security had escalated into a paranoid intensity. Little imagination is needed to see just why the Soviets were so scared. The Soviet Union and the United States were locked in proxy warfare in Afghanistan. According to a now declassified Central Intelligence Agency estimate, the war was bleeding the Soviet military. Tensions were rising in Soviet satellite states like Yugoslavia and Poland. From 7 November to 11 November 1983, NATO commanders launched what was called Operation Able Archer, an exercise intended to prepare some 40,000 American, Dutch, German, British, and Canadian troops to operate in a future chemical and nuclear weapons battlefield. The exercise, documents now available publicly reveal, envisaged a change of leadership in the Kremlin, leading to a proxy war in the Middle East and the defection of East Bloc states to the West. After a limited war in Finland, the exercise postulated, the Blue Army, or NATO, received permission to obliterate East Bloc cities, which were codenamed Orange, with nuclear weapons. When that didn't deter the Soviet Union, a larger nuclear crisis broke out. Fearing that this particular exercise might just be a deception for a real attack, no small concern for a generation of leaders who had seen Nazi Germany almost tear apart their nation, the Soviet Union prepared to unleash a real Armageddon should it be needed. To make things worse, Valerie Vaughan, Vinnie Chopra and Joel Howell note that a sophisticated computer program assembled by the Soviet Union in the 1970s was showing the matrices it was presented with were consistent with a looming nuclear war. In the event, the world got lucky. Lieutenant General Leonard Perut's declassified documents reveal was one of a handful of officers who understood just how close Able Archer had come to real war. Without NATO ever realizing, the exercise had driven the two powers to the edge of a precipice. The United States military, Perutz noted, was confident it would have detected signs of a real Soviet military response in time to back down and scale back the exercise. But he wrote, and I quote, "This may be whistling through the graveyard." Even though Able Archer was conducted against what the West saw as a peacetime context, Perutz wrote, the Soviets didn't think this peacetime was so peaceful. Top leadership in the West, like President Ronald Reagan, had been getting contradictory answers to the seriousness of the crisis, Jones observed. The KGB station chief in London, Oleg Gordievsky, actually a double agent working for British intelligence, was providing alarming evidence of Soviet paranoia. For their part, though, CIA analysts assured the president there was no such danger. To their mind, the paranoid reactions Gordievsky was highlighting were just intended to mobilize the domestic military and civilian population. 40 years after the Able Archer crisis, we confront remarkably similar situations. Think of Taiwan. Levels of trust between the great powers are deeply frayed. Artificial intelligence offers the illusion of more rational, accurate judgments than human beings can bring to the table. But it also holds out substantial risks of its own. Zachary Kallenborn, a leading expert, asks, and I quote, "How would a nuclear weapons AI even be trained? Nuclear weapons have been used only twice in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and serious nuclear crises are thankfully infrequent. Lack of examples hinders human judgment too, just as it would hinder AI training." But he writes that people, and I quote, "have the capacity for higher order reasoning, which untrained machines don't." Although autonomous nuclear weapons may not exhibit confirmation biases of the kinds we people do, the lack of real-world test environments means an autonomous nuclear weapon may also experience its own biases, which are not discovered until warfighting begins, and it's too late. I quote, "Humans can create theories and identify generalities from limited information or information that is analogous but not equivalent," Kallenborn notes. Machines cannot. The real lesson from Able Archer, President Reagan concluded in his memoirs, was that even inadvertent war between the United States and the Soviet Union would have resembled, I quote, "two spiders in a bottle locked in a suicidal fight until both were dead." That's the fate Xi and Biden are today charged with helping the entire world avoid. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint. Thank you for watching Security Code.